Preston 20. Moments after Fidel Castro died, many social justice activists thought of Castro as a hero. Tonight with me is a person by the name of Mad Woman Muse. She's a person who happens to be a Cuban American whose family is living in Cuba as I speak right now, and the other half of the family is living in the US. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Great. I guess my first question would be, how did your family that managed to escape Cuba? Was it by boat or was it by airplane?
Both of them got out by airplane. My mother came by way of she had dual citizenship with Venezuela. So technically, when she was 16, they went from Cuba to Venezuela and then they hit Miami and started their path to citizenship. My dad was 9 when they came directly to the States, and that would be New York. And they lived there for 23 years before moving to Miami.
Like, isn't like Miami like the hotspot for all the Cubans that escape Cuba?
Pretty much. And then from there, they would either establish homes and communities and businesses, or they would go to other states. I do have some relatives that live in Newark, New Jersey, and other parts along the eastern coast. And I think I have an uncle that's getting ready to move to the Midwest.
How long have your family that actually escaped Cuba lived in Cuba?
Let me see. My mom till she was 16, so I would say a good 16 years. My dad, he was the only child of his family, so that would be 9 years for him. And when my mom came, it was with her father, and 2 of her cousins. So they actually my grandparents came with 6 children, only 4 of them being theirs.
Okay, and so like basically, as we all know, like in history class, we were taught that like in the 50s, Fidel Castro as well as Che managed to overthrow the government in Cuba. Did your family live during that time period when they overthrew the government?
Yes, my mom was there before, during, and after.
Really,
So
like, did she experience like the immediate change under Fidel Castro?
yeah, she's often fond of saying that things weren't all that great under Batista, but at least they were able to keep their businesses and farms. And after Castro took over, he basically took the wealth from the people in order to make everybody equal under communism. He banned forms of entertainment like free speech, television broadcasts, and music.
As far as the free speech is concerned, like, did your mother tell you that they were not allowed to, speak ill of Castro, that kind of stuff?
Yes. They were told that if they spoke out against the Castro regime, that they would be arrested as political prisoners.
That or get fired by the firing squad?
Yep.
Do you know any family members that were actually victims of killings of Fidel Castro's?
I don't particularly know. My mom doesn't speak of that. Um, but she knows that one particular instance, because we don't know if he's still alive, after they had come back, her father went back to Cuba to get his parents, and he hadn't been heard from since. So
Wow.
just the mere act of leaving the country and then coming back, they seized him as soon as he got off the plane, and they arrested him. And he wasn't allowed to contact anybody. So they don't even know if he's still alive or if he's dead.
Is it also true, at least according to your family, that the press was also heavily controlled by Castro?
Yes. As a matter of fact, summer vacations, I would get split up in between both of my grandparents, and my grandfather found a way to get some of the signals from the radio from Cuba to bounce off when the atmosphere was right. And there was one particular radio station, I remember this vividly. I think it was a pirate radio station. It would literally broadcast what was actually going on in Cuba. And the next year I went down there, he said that that radio station he couldn't find it anymore. It was gone, and without a story, without a reason, and without an explanation.
So unless like it was state sponsored, then it's not really legal to have other kind of radios.
Right.
Okay. And so if they were to be caught with like I guess, an outsider radio station, they would also be in prison or get shot by them too, right?
Yes, and also too, since they are not allowed to openly practice any religion, if they were caught actually practicing Catholicism or any other religion, they could be arrested as well.
So if the person, I guess, was a Christian, they had to practice at home so that no one can actually see them.
And they would have to hide it if somebody came over to visit.
That's really sad. As far as Cashel is concerned, like basically he enforced, I guess you can say, like state atheism. When did that actually end?
Actually, it is still going on under Raul. His brother is a little more open and a little more bloodthirsty about his tactics, according to
Okay.
my parents.
Huh, that's interesting because the last time I heard, I think it wasn't it ending like at 1992?
Um, for the public, yes. The last time I had spoken to one of my relatives, it was during the supposed lifting of the ban. And my grandmother had a sister that came over on a visa to visit, and she was actually married to a person of the Communist Party. And she literally explained to me that she had to wait for him to leave the house to do his business for the day in order for her to practice her Catholicism so she wouldn't be arrested.
Okay. And as far as homosexuality, we already kind of know that Fidel Castro wasn't fond about homosexuality. If he found out if a person was gay, would he also kill them too?
He would either kill them or he would put them in a labor camp along with anyone that he deemed not worthy to be a Cuban citizen, like black people, anybody that wasn't of his skin color or of his nationality that he agreed with,
Speaking about
or that
black
agreed
people,
with him rather.
yeah, speaking about like black people, like there are some social justice activists saying, well, because he worked with like these black leaders, he must therefore like black people. Like, no, just because he, talk to like the black leaders doesn't mean like he must like black people. That's crazy.
As much as I hate to admit it, through the stories and from my grandparents and my parents, Castro was a very intelligent and cunning man. He knew how to play to the free press in the United States to make him seem like a completely different person than he actually was.
Right, like for example, didn't he actually try to convince them that he was not like a Marxist in the UN?
Yes, and there were quite a few times I remember that he was interviewed on the television that he used a translator, which was ironic and agitating to a lot of us because he actually went to an Ivy League college here in the States. And he
Nice. I'm
knows how to,
sorry.
yeah, he knows how to speak fluent English. He just didn't feel like it, so he used a translator.
Yeah, like I know that Shave was not that great, but like it doesn't make any sense why would Cash will have a translator.
Yeah,
As far as like food, like what does your family say about the food and how scarce it is?
when he took over and he started amassing the wealth and the resources, it got to the point where they were literally living on beans and rice every day of the week with the hope of maybe a bit of meat once or twice a month if they were lucky.
Just basically just beans and other stuff like rice. It's just as far as the tourists, did they get kind of separate meals for when they visit Cuba?
From what was explained to me, when tourists would come to Cuba, they were put in approved resorts, given the highest quality food through the restaurants in those resorts, and also given tours along approved tour routes, so they never got to see how the people actually lived.
In other words, they would just go to the nicer place, not the more gritty, kind of depressing places.
Exactly.
In other words, they just basically just went to tourist resorts. Like, what happened if like a tourist were to not go to the tourist resorts?
Castro would then exercise his power to make them to either arrest them or to kick them out of the country, depending on how far they had strayed from the approved path and places.
What are some items that Castro allowed foreigners to have compared to like the citizens of Cuba?
Normal, regular things. A bag going into Cuba could not weigh more than 70 pounds. If it weighed more than 70 pounds, they would open it up and indiscriminately start taking things out of the suitcase until it got down to 70 pounds, and then they would close it and give it back to the person. You couldn't take weapons into the country. You couldn't take medications into the country. You couldn't take anything they considered of any type of media into the country, like newspapers, magazines, or anything like that.
And what about like I guess the famous cigar? Like basically only the foreigners can have that too, right?
Yeah, they could have the Cuban cigars on the resorts, and the only way we could get them in the United States is, was through illegal means after the embargo.
How did your family actually like manage to say, you know what, enough is enough, let's get out of here?
Well, through my videos, I've been very careful not to mention my mother's name, and there's a reason for that. They were actually planning a revolution against Castro, which is one of the reasons they had to leave the country.
Oh, when you say revolution, you mean like to overthrow the Castro government?
Yes. They
Okay.
were they were part of one of the groups in the Bay of Pigs that were trained to try and rise up against Castro that failed.
Hmm. And so when they went to America, were they relieved about all the freedoms that were offered here?
Yes, they took full advantage of them. They got full citizenship. My grandmother started working in the Miami-Dade, excuse me, the Miami-Dade educational system. My mom went to college and strived for a degree while she worked and tried to support the family. My two uncles wound up having a plumbing business apiece. So they took full advantage of the freedoms that the United States gave them.
And also, as far as the hospitals are concerned, like people like to say, well, Cuba, he may not be like a good person, but they have nice hospitals. What's your thoughts about that claim?
The nicer hospitals are for what Castro considers the Cuban elite. Those would be hospitals like Emory University here in the United States, Jackson Memorial in Miami. The top echelon hospitals and healthcare is only afforded to the elite that are on Castro's side. For the regular everyday people, they have hospitals that are run down, ill manned, ill kept up. And I hate to plug myself, but in one of my videos, I have a link in the description, 2 pictures and a video somebody took of what one of the hospitals actually looked like and what the state of disrepair it was in.
So, in other words, like there's actual video and photographic evidence of the hospitals. So, I guess once this is actually over, can you send me a link to it so I can show the other people what it looks like?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. As far as the reaction to Castro's death, like, what are your thoughts about it?
I have mixed feelings because Castro's death was a relief, but seeing how his brother is not any better, I still fear for the people that are still there, because even though Raul is keeping up the appearances like his brother did and talking to Obama, and he, for months they have been talking, and the main mistake that Obama has made with these talks is that he keeps giving Raul concessions up to and including the revocation of the wet foot, dry foot policy, but he hasn't made any demands in return. And Raul is not going to offer up any concessions if he can avoid it.
As far as Obama is concerned, more recently he actually, I think, disapproved of that wet foot, dry foot policy. What are your thoughts about that?
It angered me. I actually have a raw reaction to that, and I have research I'm doing in the works to come up with a video on the history of that and how it evolved to the wet foot, dry foot. In 1966, a policy that was actually called the Cuban Adjustment Act that had regulations for Cubans to be able to immigrate and certain things that they had to follow and certain criteria they had to meet in order to become a citizen of the United States once they got here in seeking refuge from the Castro regime. Later on, that got turned into, if you can make it here and put a foot on the ground, we won't deport you.
Mm. It's really sad. Like you think that knowing the conditions of Cuba, like they would actually, be more forgiving about the Cubans that managed to escape Cuba, go on a boat across the river, and land foot to Florida. But apparently, I guess they don't really care as much.
Mm-mm. And see, a lot of people don't realize that, yes, you can get a visa to come here from Cuba. They're either 15 or 30-day visas if you're visiting. And there can be four of you filing and getting visas. But if the guy at the door of the airplane with the rifle only lets two of you on the airplane, only two of you are going.
Wow, so they actually keep count of how many people they make. I mean, let go. Excuse me.
Yes, they do.
That's actually sad. Like, it's only gonna make things worse if I'm hearing this correctly.
Yeah, my grandmother used to have an ear to the ground. She was a wonderful woman. She used to keep an ear to the ground and have a line as to who was coming into the country from Cuba because she knew everybody that was here. I don't know how she kept up with everybody. And she would start making calls saying, so and so is going to be here at this time. You need to go and get him. And the most shocking thing I ever saw was we were watching the news as the plane landed and they put the ladder to the door. And this guy literally ran down the stairs, prostrated himself on the tarmac, and he literally started kissing the ground. And I looked at grandma and I'm like, I know he's happy to be here, but isn't that an overreaction? And my grandmother said, it's not when you're Castro's taste tester. And she explained to me that the Castros have people that taste the food for them to make sure it's not poisoned before they eat it.
Hmm. Unbelievable. What are your thoughts about these people, the social justice activists that actually celebrated the life of Fidel Castro?
I think they need to go. I think they need to get visas and try and live 30 days in Cuba and they'll change their minds.
Like there were just so many articles during that day. Like I remember this one guy said that Fidel Castro was an advocate for social justice and Fidel Castro didn't do anything wrong. Like it just doesn't make any sense how anybody can celebrate a man like him.
No, and it's like, there's somebody that actually told me, goes, well, I saw, a video reaction from Cuba of people that were celebrating his death. I said it was a mandatory mourning period, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was behind the camera with a rifle and a script.
Yeah, it's impossible to actually celebrate. As a matter of fact, if I heard the news correctly, they actually told the people in Cuba to actually mourn for his death.
Yes.
And the only kind of Cubans that I've seen on the media that actually celebrated his death were the ones in Florida, excuse me.
Hmm. Yep, because they were happy to finally see him go. And what a lot of people may not realize is for over 20 years that I can remember, he's been dying of cancer. And when he finally left, it was a relief to me. But, then my mother explained to me how much worse Raul could be. And I'm like, so they're not any better. And mom went, no.
Okay, on this ending note, any final words about people that celebrate Castro, and where can people find your channel?
The Mad Woman Muses, if you look that up, you'll find my channel. I'm going to go ahead and say hi in the chat so you guys can click on me. And as far as people wanting to know more about Cuba, do some digging. Anything positive about Castro is coming from people that were either told to be that way or people that think like him. You can find online by simply Googling hospitals in Cuba, the high-end hospitals and the hospitals that would just literally upset you that the regular Cuban people have to go to. It's not all roses and butterflies down there at all. It's not the way Raul is trying to make it out to be.
Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.